Oh,
Ryan.
there are who
Or
are
there's two now. Jay Orell and Todd.
Todd McClutchy.
Well, it says Todd's note taker.
Yeah, I think that's probably Todd. All right, that's fine. I'll call for the other ones.
Check with Mary.
Um, Ryan, Darren's in the waiting room.
I think Darren and Jeff just joined as well, but we're still waiting for Mary, correct?
Yes.
Um, yes, I don't see her here. Nope. And I
All
don't
right.
have a cell phone number for her, I just realized.
You want to text it to me? I think I have it.
I, I don't have
I have
I
it right here.
have a
Let me give her a call.
yeah, I don't
I'm
think I have her cell.
texting
I
her.
have a number, but I think it's a home number.
Oh, you're texting her, John?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay, great.
oh, here she is.
So I don't have to press send, I guess.
You don't.
Did you let everyone else in, Katie?
Yep, I will. Hi, Mary.
I, sorry, I couldn't find the link.
Um,
And you didn't get my
hi.
text asking where you are.
Oh, I just heard it. I sent
Why?
an email because
I
it
didn't
wasn't.
send it.
Okay.
Everyone who's in the waiting room is now present.
All right, I think we're good to go.
Well, I'm going to call the meeting to order. The meeting of the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, July 9th. I'm going to do a roll call. We have our David Westmoreland, Mary Pedersen, and myself, and on the commission. And I'm going to ask, is there any public participation at this point? Seeing none, we'll move on. What I'd like to do tonight is to approve the minutes, and then once we approve the minutes, go down to item E and D under business, uh, in recognition of time constraints of some of our participants. So, no public participation. I'll officially open the meeting. Uh, and I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the July 11th, 2024 regular meeting.
So moved.
So move seconded. All in favor? Aye. Anybody have any changes, deletions, comments? Seeing none. All in favor? Unanimous. So with that, I will move on to item 5E. Wall Street Place. We have two items there. One is to authorize the executive director of Norwalk Redevelopment Agency to execute the loan agreement for the Wall Street Place redevelopment project. And item two is to authorize the executive director to execute the LDA amendment number 3 for Wall Street Place redevelopment project. I'm going to move them both together, and open the floor for discussion.
And I would just, before any vote or to move it, is just to add the words negotiate for each of those, and it'll become more clear as we get to the presentation today, just on some final last minute items to
Okay.
add solutions.
You have any updates, Brian?
Yeah, so I think what the way I want to handle it tonight, I'll provide just an initial introduction, and then we're joined by Todd McClutchy, an applicant with JHM for the Wall Street Place project. I know there's a number of questions that came up in between our last meeting and from our meeting, but there's a good set of updates regarding the progress that's been going on at the development site at Wall Street Place. But what's in front of you tonight are two separate items. One is in relation to a loan agreement, which is really representative of, it's really the mechanism by which we intend to deploy the $4.4 million in city capital funds for public infrastructure that have already been approved by the Common Council, and they've been sitting in our account as we've been negotiating this project. But I could defer to Todd McClutchy from JHM to explain sort of the rationale behind the structure. And we're also joined by our agency counsel, Jeff D'Onofrio, who's been working on a number of contracts for us, who can explain some of the mechanics of the loan once you get an introduction, I think, from Todd. And then maybe we take the loan first, and then we could go into the LDA amendment, which is a separate item. So Todd, I think what would be helpful, just as we get in through these items, if you could just provide just a brief update on the project for the board, and then also the sort of rationale and structuring of the loan, and then I'll have our counsel kind of opine on the structure of it, if that works for you.
Yeah, that absolutely does. And thanks for letting us attend this evening. I'm also joined by Attorney Orell, who is also on, representing us, the borrower here in this instance. And in terms of just an update for the long-awaited Wall Street development, I apologize, my camera's not on. I'm actually in the car right now. So we have been making significant progress towards our closing for the Wall Street project. As you know, it's going to be consisting of the two properties. One is the existing building over at 61 Wall Street. Going to be 105 units on that site. That's the existing one. And then across the street, which is 17 Isaacs, which is the former Garden Cinema, is going to be an additional 50 units. We'll have parking located in both buildings, with the majority of it located at 17 Isaac and a structured parking garage. And we have been making significant progress, like I mentioned a second ago, with our lender partners on this deal. We have a number of them. It is a very complicated transaction that has cleared a lot of hurdles towards the closing. And I think we are in our final weeks of that process right now with the banks and city, as well as the state partners, where we anticipate on being able to close prior to the end of the month. And one of the final pieces to this puzzle was working out the documentation with the city, like Brian had mentioned, and being able to include those infrastructure funds or the cost to complete some of the infrastructure work associated with the development in a fashion that it's also financeable and usable for tax credits. So we had worked with the city on structuring this as a loan for the $4.4 million. And we've been working with DPW, the RDA, and traffic and engineering on those infrastructure costs. I think we have come to an agreement, and we have a final plan that's being published, that was published last week, and that's being reviewed by the city. And tonight we're here to just talk specifically about some of the changes and making sure that we have our approvals and closing documentation for before the end of the month here.
Great, thanks, Todd. And I think one thing that might be helpful is if maybe Jeff D'Onofrio, who I've invited to attend, could just kind of provide a basic overview of the loan structure that you worked up.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So as Brian and Todd indicated, with respect to the $4.4 million construction dollars for infrastructure improvements. It's being structured as a construction loan, and the primary governing document will be a construction loan agreement. The construction loan agreement essentially does a half a dozen things at a macro level. First, it describes the project to be constructed and the loan being provided to pay for specific portions of the construction costs. Second, it sets forth the procedures for requesting and receiving disbursements of the loan to pay for construction costs. In other words, the when, how, and under what conditions money gets drawn against that account. It sets forth the terms of repayment, which are mostly recaptured in a note that's secured by mortgage. Sets forth the requirements for the construction project and a timeline for completion of the project, as well as incorporates the owner-architect agreement, the owner-contractor agreement, and the plans and specifications from the design team. And of course, it sets forth a list of events of default and what the lender's remedies are in the event of a default. So we've exchanged a draft and received back yesterday from Attorney Orell the borrower's comments and requested edits. The loan agreement, as you might imagine, contains clearly defined expectations and requirements, including disbursement schedules and risk mitigation tools, things like requiring a third-party construction consultant to inspect the work when a disbursement request is received, obtaining lien waivers in connection with payment applications, insurance requirements, default provisions. Prior to closing on the loan agreement, we'll have in hand the borrower's contracts with its architect, with its contractor, its construction documents, and payment and performance bonds from the contractor. Disbursements will be made under the loan agreement on the basis of an approved construction loan budget that'll be reconciled to a schedule of values attached to a payment application. And the third-party construction consultant will inspect the work to ensure that what's being requisitioned has been completed to the level of progress represented in the disbursement request. That's a pretty good summary of what the approach is under the construction loan agreement. Obviously, it's a little more complicated and detailed than what I outlined, but that's the basic concept.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think just a couple key points from our perspective that we've been keeping an eye on and we're working to finalize. That's why I sort of requested the addition of the word negotiate, is that we obviously have an infrastructure budget, as Jeff mentioned, in terms of that we'll be monitoring, that we've been negotiating through various vettings with DPW and TMP and JHM. Todd, I just sent you actually the most recent version. I don't know if you got that in your email, but I think we're pretty much almost there. Just some outstanding questions, but we'll be monitoring that, and the loan will be dispersed, just to clarify, as sort of construction drawdowns and payments as that comes. And I saw Mary had a question in terms of who's the borrower, and I think, Todd, is that directly JHM? Is that who? I mean, it's obviously your company, but is it structured as JHM? Is it the borrower?
The borrower will be, it's an LLC that we control. It's Wall Street. Jonathan, what is it? Wall Street Recap Associates LLC?
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Sorry, Mary, if that answered your question.
Could you just say again who it was and who the LLC represent? I'm a little confused because it's never stated who actually the borrower is. So I just wanted to be clear about who's borrowing the money. So you said it was somebody LLC. I didn't hear because two people were talking at once.
Yes, it's Wall Street Recap Associates LLC is the borrower for this.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? David?
Yes, I certainly appreciate the complexity of dealing with the state on closing anything. So we close at the end of this month. When does construction start?
We are actually have already started to mobilize at this point. meaning that we are starting to prep the site. We're starting to get the construction trailer ready. We are getting additional power to the site. And we have been having workers down there already, and we will have a cruise starting next week, full cruise starting next week.
So you have building permits issued?
We're just on 61 Wall Street. We'll start over there first. So we're in the process of getting the 17 Isaacs permit issued, and we're doing some of the remedial work over at 61, some of the repair work over at 61.
But you have the building permit for the full build out of 61?
Yes, it's in process right now, and it's just about issued.
Okay. So there's no reason why this project isn't finally going to start?
We are getting started, and we are going to get closed at the end of this month and move on.
I mean, I don't mean to be, I don't mean to rain on the parade, but is there anything we can put in this loan that just puts some kind of timeline limit on it if they don't actually start, that it goes away? I mean, I can't, this just can't go on any longer. And I speak for literally every citizen in Norwalk, I'm sure. I've heard it's going to happen in, the next 6 months for, I don't know how many years now. I've lost track. And I know that's most of that is not McClutchy, well precedes you guys, but I think, the Milligan settlement was over 2 years ago, and I've been hearing we're going to start, as always, we're going to start in the fall. And then in the fall, we're going to start in the spring, and now it's the spring, we're going to start in the fall. And, it's just like gone on and on and on. I just want to see some kind of language in this loan that says this loan disappears if you don't start construction full blown by September 1st of 2024. Can we do that, Brian?
I'll defer to Jeff. The point that I will note is that since it's a reimbursable, no funds would be distributed. But in terms of the eligibility, Jeff, what is the sort of latitude that you see in that regard?
Or the reimbursement disappears if it doesn't start September 1. I don't get, I just want there to be a real incentive to get this project going. I mean, I was in a meeting last week and somebody mentioned this project, and literally everyone rolled their eyes and laughed. I mean, it's a joke.
Well,
And
right
again,
now,
I just want to make clear, I know you're frustrated. I know it's been really complex, and I'm not really trying to rain on you, but we have to somehow be sure that if we approve these agreements, that this project is actually going to happen in the next 2 months.
as is typically the case, the way that the loan agreement is presently drafted, there's a construction completion date. And that completion date is December 31, 2026. The reason why you do a completion date, in a construction, if it was a construction contract, you'd have a commencement date and a completion date. On a loan agreement, all we really care about is the completion date. It's up to the developer to be able to meet the completion date. But if a start date is something that's important to the board, we can certainly talk to the borrower about that.
No, it's December 31st, 2026 for completion.
Yes,
And then what happens if they don't meet that?
then they're in default.
And what happens then?
You've got a mortgage that collateralizes the loan, and all the remedies available at law, in equity, and under the loan documents would come to bear.
And I think one piece too, just to note that, these funds are relegated just for public infrastructure. So these are relegated, what was in the LDA under the Schedule C for the underground utilities, the sidewalk work, nothing specific to the actual development. It is obviously related to the development, but in terms of it being used on the vertical construction, that's not what these funds are intended for, just as a note.
I'm playing the only card I got on behalf of the citizens of Norwalk.
I think we could interrogate something as part of the negotiation in terms of a start date. We could confer and figure out what makes sense.
I mean, honestly, I think that December 31st, 2026, that's a reasonable completion date. And that's actually, I mean, I would guess that's really fairly aggressive for a project of this size. So I don't want to add undue complication to the process here.
Great.
So
Karen
I
Callahan.
think that satisfies what I want.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I think Brian, this was what Brian was alluding to, the December 31, 2026 date. That's completion of the improvement plans, which are really the infrastructure improvements that are being funded with the city's loan.
Right, which is sidewalks and what, water mains or sewer mains.
Utilities, right, right.
I think Darren had a point. Darren, sorry, I just want to give you a chance. Are you going to come off mute?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. I was just gonna say that, obviously, I've been around here for a few years now, David, and I know where you're coming from, clearly. The completion date does, really, give us some level of assurance that the project's going to be commenced in a timely manner, because if it's not, they're going to have they're not going to be able to meet the completion date, and they're going to be in default. So it in a way is a de facto, operates as a de facto trigger to compel the commencement of the work. So I just wanted to throw that out there to you. I guess as a conceptual matter. I think one thing we are trying to do is be responsive to the needs of the developer to obtain the construction financing at the same time. So certainly we can tease out that issue of a commencement date, but just understanding that the backdrop is that a large portion of this is being financed by Bank of America and Department of Housing, State of Connecticut, and there's kind of a give and take on that level.
No, I understand that, and I think I'm okay with it the way it is. I don't want to make this any more complicated. I just think it's important that everybody understand this project has got to move forward.
I agree with you, David. I think everyone understands that. I sat on the council when we started negotiating this many years ago, so I'd like to see it come to fruition too.
But again, I do appreciate we negotiated with the Lockwood Matthews Mansion, which I'm involved in. We negotiated for over 2 years with DECD on a funding grant, and it was just a nightmare. So I mean, I know how difficult I'm sure lining all this up is, and I don't mean to add, I don't mean to sound like I'm not appreciative of that, because I am. It's just this project has just got to go. Wall Street is just never going to go anywhere, and I think we're poised to get a lot of other things going, but nothing else is going to happen unless this piece gets done. So,
okay, I think we're all in agreement with you, David. Any other questions? Any other comments?
The only, I don't know if you want to take these actions separate, John. So we have the loan agreement in front of us right now, which we discussed, and an LDA amendment. It's up to you if you want to take them separate or together. Because we should, yeah.
How were we amending this?
I think I would just add to my authorization to negotiate and execute, just so I have latitude to discuss any final loose ends as we're co-negotiating this with Corporation Council. Maybe the suggestion is we could take this action on the loan agreement, then we could go into the LDA amendment if the group's amenable, just to clarify everything, keep it clean.
But that works for me. Everybody okay with that? Seeing no comments, objections, we'll go with item E1. It's authorized the executive director of the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency to negotiate and execute the loan agreement for Wall Street Place redevelopment project. Someone move that?
I'm
David moves it. I second it. Any further discussions, any comments? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye, it's unanimous. It moves on. We'll move on to item number 2. I'm gonna read it. Authorize the Executive Director of Norwalk Redevelopment Agency to negotiate and execute the LDA Amendment number 3 for Wall Street Place redevelopment project. I'll open it for discussion. Any discussions, comments? David, Mary, anyone else? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye, that's unanimous. Thank you. From this, we're going to move on to the next item is going to be 5B, 1517 Chestnut Street.
Real quick, I think I don't know if I confused everything. I just want to make sure that you guys are all on the same page with some of the items regarding that second action right there. The LDA amendment is a little slightly different from the loan agreement, so I just want to make sure we have a chance to go over the business terms so you kind of know what the context is for the negotiation. It could be just an informational item since you guys voted, but we could always, go back. But I think I invited Darren Callahan here tonight to just update you all on some of the business terms, because there's a number of cleanup items that needed to occur as a result of the new transaction structure, or the sort of evolving transaction structure is really what it was. So it requires an amendment to the land disposition agreement that's separate from the loan agreement that we just discussed. So just to clarify that key point. So Darren, I don't know if you wanted, maybe could just provide a high level overview of some of the changes that are being pursued and requested by the applicant.
Sure. So thanks, Brian, for doing that lead in. So we're on the third iteration of the LDA, our third amendment. It was amended a couple years ago to add Mr. McClutchy's entity, JHM, as the redeveloper on the project, and to modify the LDA with respect to Mr. McClutchy's entity as redeveloper to relate only to the phase 1 improvements. That's pretty much what the agreement did. It did a few other things, like provide a timeline for certain milestones, including approval of construction documents and timing of obtaining building permits and financing and certain other things. We're now at the point where a lot of the work has been done as far as the zoning approvals, which are major triggers for the obligations under the Second Amendment, and the financing is done, the yard's length away from being closed on. And so, as you might imagine, there's a few cleanups that need to be done with respect to how we address the Second Amendment, which converted a project that was supposed to be a 3-phase project into a single-phase project. And so I'm just going to go over the high points of those changes. But for the most part, what was negotiated and agreed to with respect to the Second Amendment, which brought JHM aboard as the redeveloper, remains intact. So there's a few areas in the agreement where it refers to Citibank as the construction lender. That has changed. The construction lender, for the most part, now the primary construction lender is Bank of America. To a lesser extent, Department of Housing is providing lending on the project to the tune of a little over $13 million. But it's just a cleanup in the nomenclature in the Second Amendment. There was a detailed milestone schedule in the Second Amendment Again, for the concerns that David arose earlier about getting this project completed and having concrete milestones. The request here was to effectively provide a time period to complete the project, given where the developer is in the process of obtaining building permits and so forth and so on, and zoning approvals. What's been discussed, and I think where we're at with that is that that 36 months to complete the project is something that the city is on board with, but that we still want to see the milestone schedule in the agreement, but are willing to operate under the schedule, the construction schedule that is amenable to the construction loan lender, which makes sense because they can't, the redeveloper can't be obligated to conflicting construction schedules. So that's just a really a tweak in how the metrics in which the redeveloper has to meet certain benchmarks regarding the construction of the project. There is a provision in the agreement regarding various approvals of the conceptual master site plan, the various construction drawings or stages of those construction drawings, environmental testing, and evidence of equity capital mortgage financing. For the most part, all those items have already been completed, and so we're just cleaning up, acknowledging that here are the operative documents, and that the necessary approvals regarding them have been achieved. The only other real substantive component of the amendment is the provision regarding the parking on for the site. The second amendment required 40 parking spaces at 61 Wall, and then another a parking garage that will contain 157 parking spaces at 17 Isaac Street. It also provided a provision that allowed the redeveloper to buy out 70 of the, well, it also had a provision that required the developer to provide 100 public parking spaces, but provided an option at the election of the developer to buy out of 70 of those parking spaces at $22,000 per space. The developer has asked for, and the city is amenable to, the developer has asked to be able to buy out 100 of those parking spaces, or the full 100 at the 22,000, and the city is amenable to that, provided that we could achieve an agreement on the timing of that fee in lieu payment, which I think we're on the same page on. So how that would work is the city would the developer would have an obligation to make the election within 30 days of the effective date of this amendment, which I understand they're going to elect to do, and then they have 30 additional days to make the first half of the payment. So it's $2.2 million, 1.1 million. We expect to come in as a payment of that election within 60 days of the execution of the third amendment. And the balance of it would have to be paid on or before June 1st, 2025. So effectively, $2.2 million expected to be received under the third amendment before the close of this fiscal year. The only other change in the agreement is respect to the number of units at number of units at 61 Wall Street. It was increased from 102 to 105, so this could create 3 extra units. So that's just in broad brush, the changes. I know it's a little bit difficult to kind of take those out of context, but I do want to give you some other detail, but not too much to other detail.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so I think, we just approved the negotiation. Those are the key items that are up on the table as part of this amendment. So I don't know if there's any issue that the board has or any specific questions in this regard.
Nope.
I don't see any.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure you guys understood the context with in the universe of options that we're discussing, but it's all pretty minor stuff that we've come to terms on.
Brian, do you want me to also go over quickly the LRA while we're at it?
Yeah, if you want to just mention it real quick, that'd be helpful.
Okay, so
You're a little quiet, Darren. I don't know what happened.
sorry
There you go.
So in tandem with amending the LDA, there are provisions in the LDA that deal with the financing of the transaction. And what we've done in the past is to modify those restrictions on financing through what's called a loan recognition agreement. I know almost all of you know what I'm talking about. The loan recognition agreement is really an amendment to the LDA as it relates to the financing terms. There's just a few small tweaks that need to be made there just to recognize the new construction lender, which is Bank of America, and the sources, the funding sources for the construction lending. There's a few additional asks that we'll tease out with the developer and the lenders, or whether they're really necessary or not. It had so many iterations of this agreement that they become difficult to read it together. And, but there may be some additional substantive changes that are necessary for that document as well. But primarily, it's just recognizing Bank of America as a construction finance lender.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I think we have an approved item. If there's no changes, I think we're good to go, John, if it's up to the board.
Up to the board. I think we approve this. So thanks for the background. I don't see any reason to change anything. Anything in the motion, so we're good. Move on to the next item.
And thanks, Jeff. I don't know. I know you had a time constraint, so don't feel
Thank you.
obligated today. I
Thanks,
appreciate
folks.
it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So we're going to move to 1517 Chestnut Street LDA Amendment 1. Would you like to give us the background on that, Brian?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sorry, can I just step in? Do you want to move to the finances? Go back to the finances, the financials, I mean?
We were going to do this because
back there
Darren.
after this.
Yeah.
After, at the very end. Okay, gotcha.
All right. So, yeah, I think you all are pretty familiar with this project. This is the 200 units that we've talked about numerous times at the board. The various grant funding we received for the Spinnaker development project right there by the train station. If you'll recall, we received a $1.3 million grant to do remedial work on the site. So pre-transfer was originally the plan was we were looking at different options and how we were going to phase the project. What ended up occurring as a result of the grant that we received is that the work is going to be conducted pre-transfer. That wasn't originally contemplated in the land disposition agreement, the original land disposition agreement. So as a result, we've had to go back and make some various modifications as reflected, or it will be reflected in LDA amendment number 1 as being proposed for you tonight. Again, I would be requesting tonight to finalize negotiations and execute that document. We actually aren't a party to the land disposition agreement. I'm sort of serving as the business agent on behalf of the city in negotiating that transaction and navigating all of these grant requirements. But the key thing is with the $1.3 million come a number of sort of requirements and other programmatic sort of guarantees that need to occur, and that we'll be undertaking the work and exposing ourselves a little bit to an element of risk. So what the LDA amendment, and I'll have Darren talk a little bit about that, is serving is to help mitigate that risk and set forth and correct the provisions in terms of how the actual environmental remediation work is going to take place that was not originally contemplated in the land disposition agreement. So that's a mouthful, but I'll let Darren, if you're still there, if you might be able to just talk about some of the key business items that are being negotiated for the board's benefit.
Great, thanks, Brian. Again, if anyone can't hear me, just let me know and I'll try to speak up. I don't know, my microphone sometimes doesn't work quite so hot. So when we initially negotiated the LDA, it was contemplated that we would convey the property, and the developer would do all the site work for the property, including excavating its foundation. And but one of the things that Brian had was working on is obtaining some funding from DECD, which we could potentially pass on our subgrant to the developer to assist with the cost of effectively the transportation and disposal of some of the soil that would need to be dug out, because there was some additional cost related to that, where it had to be disposed because of, I believe, some level of heavier than normal metals in the ground. Nothing needing to be remediated per se, but it needed to go to a proper facility. The developer approached us later on after we finalized the deal and said, "Hey, thanks for getting the grant. By the way, we'd really prefer if it would simplify life for us if the city, the city and the RDA would take the money itself instead of subgranting us, and go hire a contractor and use that money to dig out a portion of the foundation and do that disposal work before we convey before they close on the land transaction." And we were amenable to that in concept, but it created several issues regarding how we would do that that weren't contemplated in the original land disposition agreement. For example, at the time of closing, the redeveloper had the obligation to provide temporary off-site parking upon commencement of the construction. But at this point, if we're going to be asked to effectively dig up a portion of the ground, they would need to provide that temporary parking prior to closing. Another issue is in the event that, and I think this is a really unlikely event, but in the event that for some reason they couldn't close, for example, if say they couldn't get their construction financing in order, we couldn't be left with a big hole in the ground. So we needed to figure out how we were going to address that issue of having done a bunch of work and removed soil, and not have the closing occur in the project move forward. And so the way we dealt with that is through an escrow agreement where we would the developer would require to escrow several $100,000, I can't remember the exact amount, around $800,000 in an account in the event they didn't close, which would be used to restore the property to the condition that existed before we commenced the work. We also, because we are using the DC grant funds, DCD requires certain guarantees to advance those funds. And we also are requiring certain guarantees as well to cover our risk in advance of those funds should the closing not occur. Personal guarantees from the developer. So that's in broad brush what we're trying to accomplish by the amendment is effectively address the risks that arise directly as a result of doing this work prior to conveyance of the property and utilizing those grant funds to do it. if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer.
So the city's going to manage the project to do the cleanup. And the developer is going to guarantee funding any unknowns that are found that have to be cleaned up also that are not provided for in the grant funds. Is that the gist?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So they're not going to guarantee any unknowns. What we're obligated to do under the agreement is provide the parcel, the city parcel, the a half acre of land or so that we're conveying at 30 Monroe. We're obligated to convey that. In a condition that meets residential remediation standard regulations. And so we are going to perform some work to do that. And then we are going to, and then they're going to, the developer's going to need to make an election on whether they're going to proceed with us doing the additional work, which is, digging out part of the foundation. In order for us to get comfortable with doing that second part of that work, we are requiring the developer's principal, Clay Fowler, to guarantee that to the extent that we access any funds, any grant funds to do this work, and they don't close, and the city then becomes responsible for reimbursing those funds, that guarantee covers that liability. All right. Part one. Part two, we've also required an escrow from the developer. Again, to the extent that we spend this money, dig out a large hole, which effectively provides the hole for their part of their foundation, that there would be money set aside, money that we didn't have to go to court over to restore that hole, backfill it and pay. All right. And to the extent that escrow, which is we've gotten as a reasonable estimate of cost from our own, and I mean our own, Brian has Ty and Bond as their LAP. They've estimated the cost to backfill and pay to be around $1 million. But those estimates are subject to change. The market condition for construction changes, and so we have a guarantee that the developer, principal, again, Clay, is required to provide that to the extent that the cost of restoration exceeds the escrow, the principal is guaranteeing that amount. So that's how we're addressing the risk. We're willing to keep the grant funds at our level and not sub-grant them and do the work prior to conveyance, but we're only willing to do it under a readjustment of the risk in doing it. Now it's not risk-free, but we've made quite significant strides in mitigating the risk in doing that way.
And if I could real quick, just add a little color to those 2 points. The work that we're undertaking with the remediation is in conjunction with other EPA funded grant work that we already are obligated to undertake through another grant that we received for the other portion of the site, as well as a portion of the development site. So that work was going to be completed in conjunction with that as the idea. The LDA amendment had to make certain adjustments in terms of the sequencing in that regard. And then the other piece of it too is that, there's a note that the foundation in reference, but it's really, there's levels of contamination that are at various standards on the site, and through the transaction in the process, we've basically, valued and agreed to sell the clean dirt at the end of the day. So that is ultimately what the intent of these grant funds are to be used for. And then this LDA amendment, as Darren mentioned, is to help us mechanize that process and achieve all the risk mitigation that he mentioned.
But what happens if there's not enough grant funds to cover, any surprises in terms of toxic whatever found as this process goes? Who's on the hook for that?
Yeah, so it's a key point, and we're still working to negotiate the final details on that. But we have gotten estimates from Ty and Bond, and we actually have the bids back. We actually know what the bid is. We already put this out to bid. We've received what they are, and we're right at the amount of available funding that we have for the overall project with no contingency.
Well, we did that with Bryant Park, and then it wasn't enough anyway.
Correct. Yeah, so we've
More
talked
so.
with DECD, and they do have a provision in their regulations to allow for requests up to 50% of the grant award in addition to for those kind of instances. But what we've done to try to mitigate that risk is basically we're breaking the project into 3 phases in the contract, at which point we're going to do phase 1, which will be funded by the EPA work. And we're going to see where we're at and if we start going into any contingency before we authorize the next phases. So we're going to have the contract structured in a way to where we could kind of monitor that as we go and perhaps not award later phases if we do not have funding available. Or the developer does not make the election to guarantee the DECD resources. We're fairly confident once the developer makes the election, it engages the DECD resources, we'll be fine to fund the whole project. And if that isn't the case, those are the mechanisms we're negotiating right now to figure out how we could avoid that specific risk.
Okay. And putting my exclusively redevelopment agency hat on, is there any point in this process where something happens and the redevelopment agency is stuck with some liability we're on the hook for and the city isn't?
Yeah, and I've spent my entire day dwelling on that specific concept because that's the point we're at. So I do have an answer actually for that. So I think the scenario that could exist is, as I mentioned, we have EPA funding to do it to the tune of about $500,000, EPA required work. And we have a grant from DECD for 1.3 million. As I noted, we're about 1.6, 1.7 million that we require for the grant. Minus any contingency. The scenario that I think there could be any exposure is we start the phase 1 work, which is to clean up the one portion of the parking lot to RSR standards. We go in, we test that information, we send it to the developer. They say, no, we don't want to move forward with this. It's dirty. It's a very unlikely scenario, as what Darren said, but it is a scenario that is to answer your question directly. They say no. So that means I need to spend the remaining $275,000 of EPA funding that I have to refill that hole and pave it. Then I don't have the money to go clean up area 4, which we're obligated to fund from EPA. I have a meeting scheduled Thursday with EPA to discuss this exact scenario. But that is the one key exposure point that we do not have a remedy currently, but we are looking for other options. There could be options by way of, working with EPA to make them okay with that concept. And that's what I'm interrogating first. There's also no interest loans that are out there that can be repaid by city capital, or we have to negotiate in the LDA amendment with the city that they'll cover those costs ahead of time. And this is, all out in the open here. That we're going to have to guarantee some sort of provisions in that regard to secure us, because that is the one scenario I don't have an answer for right now.
Okay. And then when you say we are going in to clean up, who is managing the cleanup project? Is that your staff or is that city staff?
Well, so it's our staff, in conjunction with our LEP. So we have a hired LEP through Ty and Bond that's going to be managing that along with our contractor.
So we're managing the project, the redevelopment.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So what are you asking us to do tonight?
Basically to authorize me to negotiate and execute this agreement once it settles all the terms that we've just discussed.
And Brian, could I just ask a favor? Could you just repeat again why the developer pulled out of this stage and is asking you all to do it? Because
Well, it's not even necessarily they're asking us to do it. I think that's the characterization is that we have to do the EPA funded grant work already. And we're, doing it pre-conveyance, and the commitment that we have, we're selling clean dirt to them is sort of the obligation that we've negotiated with them. They bought dirt at fair market value, right? Not contaminated soil prices. So the expectation is that we're going to have it cleaned up pre-transfer.
thank you.
Any other questions, comments? So we're going to amend this motion here to say negotiate and execute as well, correct?
Yes, please.
All right, so I'll read this motion and ask for someone to move it. Authorize the executive director of Norwalk Redevelopment Agency to negotiate and execute any and all documents related to 1517 Chestnut Street, LDA Amendment Number 1. Somebody want to move that? Everyone wants to move it. David moves it. I'll second it. All in favor? No, if there's no more discussion. Okay, that is approved unanimously. Any other questions, discussion on this subject? No? Seeing none, I think we'll go back to the beginning of our agenda.
And I would just say, Darren, be kind to us. We're just a little agency.
Believe me, it's Darren that's often taking the brunt of the force. I will admit that here on records. Thank you, Darren. I appreciate your help.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
No, I will say, Darren's been super helpful. It's been a very complex process to navigate all of these challenges, but we'll keep you posted as things develop.
Okay. So we'll move on to item 4B, financials of the NRDA Operating Fund 100 financials for year to date. And we're also going to approve the redevelopment agency revenue and expenditures. Eugenia, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. You've been
For the year to
anticipating
date-
this moment. You've been anticipating this moment.
True. For the year to date, May 31st, the operating fund 100 had actual revenue of 1,503,000 versus a budget of 1,385,000 for a favorable variance of $118,000. Total actual expenditures of 1,765,000 versus budgeted expenditures of 1,757,000 resulted in an unfavorable variance of 8,000. The actual operating deficit of 262,000 versus the budgeted operating deficit of 371,000 resulted in a favorable variance of 109,000.
I had a question on the income side. There was the 263,000 that's other revenue. What is that?
The $236,000. The interest income from the notes, that's basically loans that have the interest for loans that have been paid. That's the interest income that we've received by the company that, administers this. And then the interest income is the interest income on our money market accounts that Fund 100 has. That's the bulk of it. And then the rental income from NAACP.
I'm sorry, I realized how I read it wrong, so you can scratch that question. Sorry.
Any other questions, comments?
And just for clarification's sake, remind me of the mechanism that when there's the deficit, that the city reimburses for that deficit, yes? How does that?
No, basically, when there's a deficit, then the agency has to use their cash to pay for that. Because included on this P&L is, we have already, in the grant revenues, there's that second line of the city money that we receive for the admin.
Okay, so this is the mechanism, David, that you talked about, that we're spending down some of the reserves, correct?
Correct.
Our
Okay.
cash.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. No questions, no comments. I'll look for a motion to approve the redevelopment agency revenues and expenditures for operating fund 100 year to date, May 31st, 2024. I'll move it. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, then we'll go on to item B2, the 2024-25 agency operating budget. We're to approve the fiscal year 2024-25 agency fund 100 operating budget. I'll turn that over to you, Eugenia. Comments from Brian.
Yeah, I could present on this one, and Eugenia is here, obviously, if there's any questions. So we're referencing the page. It's referenced statement of revenue expenditures for operating fund, but it's FYE 6/30/25. It's sort of structured as a similar format.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, you want me to share the screen real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably
Please.
the easiest way to do this. Let me see here. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yeah, that
Yes.
was in our packet, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was in your
Yes.
packet. Yeah, it was in the packet. So
What are
basically,
you doing?
this reflects year-over-year comparisons and any, changes in position for what we've proposed for this year's budget versus the next. On a revenue side of things, the first two items are really related to funding we receive from the city. The first one being the city position on the fair housing officer, so it's more of a pass-through, comes in and out of our office. The city administrative support, we were fortunate to secure an additional $500,000 this year for staff services. That started last year and is continuing, fortunately. A number of sort of discretionary temporal grants like ARPA, the MLK facades are not recurring sources of funds, so they're not included in this year's budget. We've included some program income from our city neighborhoods program and an NRA grant and program admin that is being cycled into for management of the CDBG program and other administrative actions. And then things like the CV administration, EPA funding, and other are not being recorded here as they've been exhausted based on the grants that we received. As we discussed, the interest income is a pretty straightforward calculation based on what we received and is serviced by our third-party vendor. On the expenditure side of things, try to keep things relatively flat. We did include a funding for a bonus pool for staff similar to what we did this year, where we're going to make staff eligible for a 2 to 5% increase based on performance. So we'll be going through a performance review and sort of metrics establishment process to award those bonuses, or not bonuses, sorry, salary increases. In terms of benefits, it's really the same census that we've had in previous years, just different reflection of costs. In terms of the key administrative expenses that we're noting, pretty much keeping things flat. We do expect decreases in our occupancy budget. If you recall, the city has officially sold 3 Belden. As it stands now, we're slated to keep offices there, but we will not be paying rent. We still need to discuss with the city what that looks like because they just are in the final processes of they just finalized that transaction and they're developing an operational plan. But our intent is that, we will not be incurring any costs for the 3 Belden as was expected. From the general office expenses, insurances, those all remain pretty flat. IT expenses, you see a 20% increase, which is really, a few $1,000s. And the reason why we put that there is because our server is going to need to be replaced this year. It's vintage 2017, and IT has said it's reached its useful life, and we need to invest in that asset. Everything else is pretty straightforward. I did put a little extra in marketing, and that's largely attributable to the surveys we've been developing and distributing. We're trying to do a lot of targeted outreach with mailers and postcards and things of that nature, which has, obviously incurred costs that were a little bit above what we expected last year. So we're carrying that forward for this year. And then, as you noted, Mary, the deficit is really just a reflection of our decrease in our cash position that's used to offset and balance the budget, has been the practice for the last few years.
One observation, it appears that our legal fees are way up compared to the previous years. If I can't see the top of the column.
Yeah, and that's largely related, and Eugenia, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's because of all of the development negotiations that we've had, and some of those are reimbursable expenses that we baked into the development agreements.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, that's pretty much, it's been the same, it's the same as last year and the previous year. We just kind of keep, I mean, for the Spinnaker project, we're gonna be reimbursed, but I don't know if that's gonna continue next year to be reimbursed or not, so.
Oh, and John, what are you referring to? Because we kept it level from year over year from 30,000. Are you looking at this number
Okay.
perhaps?
Yeah, I looked
125?
over there.
Yeah, they've been
It's-
decreasing actually since we, navigated the
No,
POCO.
125.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. You're anticipating 7% increase in salaries?
So in the pool, there's a little bit of a cushion in there. We don't expect a 7% blanket increase in salaries. There's just the establishment of a 2 to 5% increase pool for salary increases. That'll be distributed based on performance reviews.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? None?
When we had a discussion, sorry to put you on the spot, Brian, but you had said you had named a number of years of how long we could maintain this deficit spending. Can you
I'm
remind?
gonna have to look into that a little bit further to update that. And I think I could follow up with you separately if that works.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just, when I understand you've explained to me in the past the mechanics of why the deficit spending, but if we're going to approve another deficit budget, I want to make sure that I understand what the timeline is, or, and I know that you've been thinking about solutions, but I would just like to be better informed about that if we're going to approve a deficit budget.
Yeah, the last data, the cash flow was about a 3.5 year horizon.
The city is aware of that as well, correct?
Correct.
All right. Call for a vote to approve the 24-25 agency fund operating budget. When all in favor? Reluctant, it was a reluctant vote, but it's approved. Going on to item, if I got this right, we go on to item 5, business, the consolidated plan authorization. Brian?
Yeah, so this is a pretty straightforward item. As part of our CDBG funding program, the cities actually, they're required every 5 years to adopt a consolidated plan, which sort of sets out the long-term vision for the CDBG program within its various categories. And that basically we're going to be managing that on behalf of the city as part of our administrative responsibility. And we've been allocated $70,000 in the city capital fund to fund that. The staff went through a procurement, and they're recommending the TDA consulting group, who has done a lot of our admin consulting as we've managed the plan throughout the year for that work. And this authorization would allow me to execute the agreement and any documents related to development and implementation of development of the 2025 and the 2029 consolidated plan.
So Brian, is this basically a formality? Because I went back and read the last 5-year plan, and it sounded like we're in the same situation as what was being addressed 5 years ago. And I also wanted to ask, could you remind me, what's the total amount of CBDG funds that you're managing?
Yeah, the city gets about $900,000, $888,000, I think, to the tune of. And to answer your first question, yes, it is a rather administrative requirement that we adopt this plan, and then you basically have to define the low to moderate income need within the community, justify it, and then how you're going to allocate the funding resources amongst the various categories. But also, that's the annual action plan. We do an updated plan every year, and then we show performance metrics. But this is the overall 5-year document that kind of guides that overall planning process.
can't just change the date on the last 5-year plan and sign it and not spend.
Unfortunately, there's
Close
a
the
lot of,
deficit bit.
it's a very specific legal process with public outreach that we have to follow. So yeah, unfortunately, it's
You
not
know,
that.
it's what's the big city plan we
The
do?
POC, the
5 years.
POC.
I want to kill myself every single time. It's like, please just sign the old plan. Don't make us do this again and spend all of this money for something we don't use. But yeah, I hear you. All right. I'll behave.
All right.
Sounds
motion.
great.
I'll move.
So moved. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Hey. We're moving on now to item 5C, the Brownfield Grant, round 19 for Norwalk Housing Authority Meadow Gardens redevelopment project. Brian? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Hear you now.
All right, so this project's also come before you. This is the redevelopment of Meadow Gardens. We've just been working with the Housing Authority and DCD to obtain a $3.3 million grant to help them with their remediation of that site. If you recall, there's gonna be a total of 59 units, affordable housing. I think it's 36 of which are gonna be restricted to 30% of area median income. And it says the remaining 23 units to 50% AMI. So this is going to be a deeply affordable housing development project and a definite upgrade for the community. And with the resolution that or the action that I'm proposing is to just allow me to execute any and all agreements with DCD and the Norwalk Housing Authority to implement the brownfield remediation component of this project, which will be actually managed by the Housing Authority. So we're not going to be taking on the management responsibility of the actual cleanup.
Are we taking on any liability for the cleanup?
No, we're basically in the agreements that we're structured with the Housing Authority, we're going to be passing on that liability along with the funds.
And Brian, is redevelopment doing it? Is it because they have more expertise within redevelopment to do it than within the house?
It's their project. I mean, ultimately, they're the ones constructing and building the project, so we want to make sure that's self-contained.
No, I'm sorry. Why are we undertaking the cleanup?
We're not undertaking the cleanup.
I'm sorry. Why are we doing?
Right.
We're taking responsibility for the funding for it for them.
Correct, because we're the eligible entity for the funding. They're not eligible.
Thank you. That was what I was asking. Got it.
And they're just,
How many units are there now?
I'm not sure how many there are now, but I know it's going to be 59.
I think it's just one,
45?
isn't it?
I'm sorry.
There's 54 units, Brian.
There's 54 currently?
Yep.
Okay, so okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
And everyone has to move out. Or are they phasing it?
Yeah, I'm not so in tune with the mechanics of that specifically, be Adam Bobilski, but Stephen, do you happen to know if
I do. They should have had everybody out for the end of last month was the last update that I had heard from them. They do have the majority of the people out. I don't know if they got the last remaining couple of people in there, but they've already started their relocation. And as of the kickoff meeting that they had the majority of the tenants out and relocated to other acceptable housing.
And the question I always get, the reason why I'm asking this is because I get these questions in my community. Will all those people have the right to go back after it's completed? Do we know?
I believe they offer them the right of first.
Breaking up, Stephen. Yeah, as part of the
Purchase release, but I'm not sure.
Sorry about that.
Lost them.
Yeah, they are offered, but I think a lot of them in the sound Soundview Landing, they chose to not come back, even though I think they do have that option with their voucher or however that works.
Yeah, they typically with the universal relocation stuff that I believe they have to follow for that, they're offered a right to go back first, but they're not the tenants don't need to go back. If they like their housing that they've been situated with, or just aren't wanting to go back to that location, they're not required to go back.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussion points? Nothing? So the item is to authorize the executive director of Norwalk Redevelopment Agency to execute any and all agreements in accordance with state Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development requirements for the Norwalk Housing Authority Meadow Gardens redevelopment project. One sentence. Somebody move that. David moves it. All in favor? Aye. Carried unanimously. We'll move on to item D, which is Washington Street Railroad Bridge Right of Entry Agreement. Brian?
All right, so this one has been requested by CTDOT. Apparently the agreement that was signed well before my time for the installation of the Sono sign on the DOT owned wall is up for renewal. Effectively what that is DOT owns the wall and they're allowing us to use the wall, but I need to be authorized to sign that agreement. On our end, we're required to actually maintain insurance and technically maintain the sign, although there has not been any maintenance activity required over the years. But the plan is that we would just re-execute that agreement and maintain the status quo as it's been, to keep that sign up.
Sounds good.
I was around when we first did the sign.
Okay.
And I love the sign, actually. Isn't this something we should like transfer to economic development, the city just deal with?
That is a question. I mean, we maintained the agreement before, so it's kind of, they've contacted us to continue it, and we were trying to make it any more difficult, but we, could obviously maintain that, have that conversation.
Well, it's just kind of, I was just thinking it's one less thing for you guys to worry about. And it's kind of really isn't that kind of what a lot of the stuff that Jessica's working on now?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think the option could be if you guys want to authorize me to do it, but I could also negotiate that with the city before I sign anything and see if that's a better course of action, or if you want to wait, it's up to you.
I'm happy to authorize you to do it. I just suggesting
I
maybe.
second it.
We'll talk to the city. I mean, I think we're just trying to make it easy because it's pretty straight. We haven't had any sort of issues or any, any work that we had to do to it. So it hasn't been a problem, but we're happy to entertain that conversation.
If you want to, I don't care. I'm just suggesting.
All right. Do we need a motion to move this?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. That takes care of our formal agenda. Any new business? Anything anyone wants to bring up? None? Any old business?
The only thing I ever have to ask about is Wall Street Place, and I already know the answer.
David, I feel exactly the way you do. I remember sitting on the council and going through this LDA process with them, and all the changes and we anticipated everything we thought, and
Right.
It just never worked out. So let's hope it gets done. Anyway, seeing no new business or old business, item 8, Mary, want to make a motion to adjourn?
Be happy to make the motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye, carried. Good night. Have a nice
Everyone.
evening
Good
and
night, everyone.
Here.
stay cool the rest of the week.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.